I still sometimes feel like I'm on the outside looking in. It was a shock. I felt sick. You just shut down. You go numb. And you just try to put it out, that it's not happening, it's not real. And of course, it was.
Henry Keogh savours as many sunsets as he can these days because for a third of his life he was denied them. The 60-year-old was sentenced to life in prison in 1995 for the murder of his fiancée. He spent 20 long years behind bars before his conviction was quashed.
This is a catastrophic failure of the justice system. And if we turn a blind eye to that, then whether it's Henry Keogh or you or me or anyone else are at risk from a process like that.
Henry Keogh was convicted for something that never happened. That is abundantly clear. There's no evidence of a criminal event having occurred at all.
You could be a Betty dancer.
After missing out on so much of his own kids' lives, Henry makes up for lost time with his precious grandkids.
Well, I love that he's out of prison now because I've been praying. When he was in prison, I've been praying every night. So now I can see him basically whenever I want.
His daughter Elise has married, given birth to 4 children, and Henry was locked away for most of it.
And I remember thinking how we lived in a country where it was innocent until proven guilty. And right from the outset, it wasn't innocent until proven guilty. It was guilty until proven innocent.
We had a really open and honest relationship. And we could talk about whatever was on each other's hearts, and they never doubted their father, me, for an instant.
How long were you in jail?
20 and a half years.
It's the middle of your life.
Pretty much. A big slap.
And I can't give it back to you.
No, never. You can't unring that bell. It's done.
Before he was locked up, life looked pretty good for Henry. He always showed promise as a teenager, making it onto a local quiz show. He married at 21 and had 3 daughters. His chosen career, a financial advisor and insurance agent. Then, in 1991, he left his wife Sue after falling in love with Anna Jane Cheney.
It was something that came out of left field. Infatuated is not quite the right word. That doesn't do it justice. She was just unbelievably engaging, funny, smart, super intelligent. Great sense of humour. Everybody loved her. Everybody. In a word, she was amazing.
By March 1994, he was 6 weeks away from marrying the 29-year-old lawyer.
She just became so important to me, so engaging, so fulfilling. Her company was just brilliant.
On Friday, the 18th of March, they met after work for drinks.
We're both in really good spirits. It was the end of the week, looking forward to the weekend. The wedding wasn't far off.
That's awesome.
We loved each other's company. A good start to what I thought was going to be another typical weekend together.
What a beautiful night.
A couple of hours after they got home, Henry decided to visit his mum. Anna Jane stayed behind.
She was going to run herself a bath. She had a bit of an achy back, and so I said, OK, I won't be long.
No one knows exactly what happened next, but during the hour that Henry was gone, one life was lost and others would be shattered.
I came back, was walking through the house, and called out to her, and I didn't get an answer. Found her slumped in the bath. I'd hoped that she was just asleep, just fainted, and my brain's screaming, get her out, and then she'll be okay. She wasn't responding. I tried to revive her, and then I was just praying that when the ambos came, they'd be able to resuscitate her, that she'd pull through. You can't believe it, you're not ready for it. You don't want to believe it when they tell you, she hasn't made it.
It wasn't long before the police arrived at the scene.
And not a single one of them said there was any suggestion whatsoever of an argument, foul play, or anything. And they just put it down to natural causes, accident.
When Anna Jane was discovered in the bath, there were no suspicious circumstances.
You're correct. From the scene, there was no suspicion raised. Henry had no injuries on him. Anna Jane had none to speak of. There was nothing there that suggested this was a murder.
Anna Jane's body was entered at the mortuary as a non-suspicious death.
Henry believed that Anna Jane had died as a result of an accident. He thought the police believed that too. But within days, they were back asking pointed questions. Suddenly, it was not an accident, it was murder. And Henry was the prime suspect.
The police came round, said they wanted to put some questions to me, and meantime they were going to search the house. And they just started making all these outrageous allegations.
Police thought they had found compelling circumstantial evidence pointing to a motive for murder. There were alleged affairs, and Henry had taken out 5 life insurance policies in Anna Jane's name and forged her signature.
Doesn't look good, does it?
No, of course not.
Did Anna Jane know about these insurance policies?
Yes, she did.
Did you sign on her behalf?
Yes, I did.
Doesn't look good, does it?
No.
In dollar terms, it was about 1.2 million, which was, a sizable amount of money.
At the time, Henry was working in the investment services division of a South Australian bank. But industry uncertainty meant he kept his insurance business as a sideline with the potential of earning some commission.
You have to continue to put some business through them, or they'll close them down on you.
You're saying that was normal practice?
Well, I wouldn't say necessarily normal practice, probably a poor choice, but it is common practice amongst some couples and partners that they will do it for each other.
It is not legal, but it is a practice most in the insurance game know about.
There's a term in insurance called tombstoning, and it's where you invent a policy as a insurance salesman. Tombstoning, because they used to take people's names off graves. You write the policy. For the first few years, the commission is larger than the premiums. It keeps work flowing through your agency and it pays for itself. It's a recognised practice within the insurance industry.
But the policies were enough to raise suspicion and led investigators to ask, did Anna Jane simply slip and drown or was she murdered?
And I'm thinking this madness is going to stop as soon as the results of the autopsy are going to come in.
The chief forensic pathologist, Dr. Colin Manock, began his autopsy 2 days after Anna Jane was found drowned in the bath. He revisited the body after suspicions were raised. He'd examined the body once. Then when he heard that there were suspicions, including insurance policies, he went back.
Looked again, yes. And came up with this grip theory because there were faint bruises on the outside of the left leg. And he maintained there was a key thumb bruise on the inside of the left leg. And he came up with this notion that her legs had been lifted over her head and she'd been drowned. And the fingerprints were the handprints of murder.
They put it to me that, I'd held her under or I'd held her up and lifted her up bodily. I mean, it was bizarre. I'm still in shock at just losing her and still trying to come to terms with that. And I'm being bombarded with accusations that seem to be totally surreal and fanciful.
At what point did you say to yourself, I am in big trouble?
When I was arrested, not till then.
Can you remember the first time that cell door shut on you?
There's been so many cell doors.
The first one?
Yeah. You're just struck with disbelief that this is even happening. Couldn't believe it. Could not believe it.
40-year-old financial advisor and insurance agent Henry Keogh had just been charged with the murder of his fiancée, lawyer Anna Jane Cheney. They were 6 weeks away from the wedding when she was found drowned in the bath.
I still remember it now, even though it was so long ago. Yeah.
Henry's daughter, Elise Larkham, remembers vividly the day he was arrested. She was only 12.
How does a 12-year-old kid go to school after those headlines?
There were people saying, is that your father the murderer? And I was like, no. And so I didn't talk about it. I pretended that it wasn't my dad. So you go from not only the embarrassment and the shame to the guilt because you know that your father's innocent and you haven't stood up for him.
Henry was sent to trial in February 1995. The case against him was mostly circumstantial and included the insurance policies as motive.
Murder and money go hand in hand. The notion of a bloke drowning his loving fiancée 6 weeks before their marriage for the sake of filthy lucre, well, who could defend that? And that's the way the public saw it. And fair enough, that's the message they got.
A big issue was made of them as a motive. But if there is no murder, both logically and in law, motive, any motive, whether it's insurances or an argument or an intense dislike of another person, is totally irrelevant and of no meaning.
During Henry's trial, considerable weight was also placed on the forensic evidence presented by South Australia's chief forensic pathologist, Dr. Colin Manock.
The evidence that convicted him was based around what Dr. Manock had to say.
All the jury heard is he's done over 9,000 autopsies, therefore he must be an expert.
Dr. Manock told the jury that Anna Jane Cheney's death was an assisted drowning. He concluded that she had been conscious when she went under the water.
At the time of the trial, he said, "I knew that this woman was conscious when she was forced into the water, because if she'd been unconscious, then she would have had a mark on the brain, and I would have seen that at autopsy."
Manick also said bruises on her leg formed a grip mark. Her assailant, he said, would place his right arm under her legs and grip the left ankle with the right hand, then lift the legs above the head, submerging her head in the water. Dr. Manick also claimed the bruises occurred within hours of her death.
So the age of the bruises was crucial because, of course, if they were made close to time of death, then they became more suspicious.
Dr. Manick presented black and white photos of Anna Jane's bruises to the jury.
At the trial, he said all the slides that he'd taken showed signs of bruising.
The case against Henry began to build.
People who didn't like me, people who had felt that because there were insurance policies in place, that that was my motive. And overridingly was the fact that Manick had said that, in his opinion, fit young women don't suddenly die. He said that there were marks and there were bruises.
They kept saying how intelligent he was and how calculating he was. And yet, if he had murdered her, he was a completely stupid criminal. The crime itself doesn't add up. My dad is highly intelligent, and for me that was what completely sealed it. Trying to be unbiased and look at it from an outsider's perspective, it was like, if he was going to kill her, he would have done a lot smarter.
After 2 weeks of evidence, the jury could not reach a verdict, and the judge was asked to consider dismissing them after unfair media reports. The result was a hung jury and a retrial was ordered.
How did you react to that?
You have no power in that situation. None whatsoever. Events just roll over you relentlessly. Wasn't that long between the two trials.
Henry's second trial began in August 1995. Once again, all the evidence was circumstantial, but the jury was reminded of Dr. Colin Manick's qualifications and experience.
There are very good reasons for carrying out post-mortem examinations.
He was an expert. He was an expert. He'd know.
On the 23rd of August 1995, Henry Keogh was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison.
The former bank manager was convicted by a jury of deliberately drowning Miss Cheney in the bath in their McGill home.
I felt sick. I was numb. I was bewildered. There's this disconnect. Intellectually, you might hear what they're saying, but when in your heart you know you haven't done anything, you can't just switch that off.
What's it like for a kid going to prison to see your dad?
It's terrifying. They're not friendly places. He always tried to be stoic and strong for us, but my dad's eyes always give him away.
I wanted to keep a brave front for my family and kids. I knew they were doing it badly enough without having to worry about how I was dealing with things. And I didn't want the guards or the system to think that I was buckling under it. That would be admitting defeat, and that's not in my makeup.
Keogh, now 41, will be in his mid-60s before he can apply for parole.
When he was in prison, we couldn't call him, he could only call us. When Dad called us, we knew that he was doing well. When we didn't hear from him, we knew that he wasn't doing well. And he definitely had dark times.
You wonder too, am I ever going to get out? Am I going to die in here?
In all your examination of everything to do with the Keogh trial, did you see anything which indicated he could be guilty?
Oh no, quite the contrary. One can be quite confident that there was no murder, no criminal assault, no offence has been caused here, and that Henry Keogh was convicted for something that never happened.
In 1995, Henry Keogh was sentenced to life for drowning his fiancée in the bath. 5 years later, former law lecturer Dr. Bob Moles began scrutinising Henry's case.
I'd been working on it for about 6 to 8 months, off and on, before I realised that this was actually a fundamental, serious miscarriage of justice.
Dr. Moles discovered some serious flaws in the evidence South Australia's chief forensic pathologist, Dr. Colin Manock, presented at Henry's trial.
The disturbing thing is that he's given evidence in over 400 criminal trials when he actually wasn't qualified to do so. He's actually conducted 10,000 autopsies when he actually wasn't qualified to complete an autopsy on his own.
Dr. Manock was appointed to South Australia's top forensic position in 1968, without all the necessary qualifications as a pathologist. And he has never been trained in histopathology, the examination of organs and tissue under a microscope.
We had a man in an expert's position, but without expert qualifications.
The truth is that the case assembled against Henry Keogh was unsound even before the trial began. What Henry didn't know was that serious questions had been raised about Dr. Colin Manock's expertise. There have been questions raised about his competence.
Yes, there have in many cases.
I was just screaming, he's dead, he's dead, he's dead.
The first to raise alarm bells was the deaths of 3 babies in separate incidents in the early 90s. All of them had horrendous signs of abuse, and one of them had 15 fractures. So, what did Dr. Manock conclude?
He said they died of bronchopneumonia.
And it so shocked police and doctors that they demanded an inquest be held, and the coroner put them 3 together and ran an inquest.
The coroner was scathing of Dr. Manock.
He said that Dr. Manock had seen things that couldn't have been seen. He also said that in answer to questions during the coronial inquiry, some of the answers by Dr. Manock had been spurious, means not genuine, not honest.
He made some serious errors.
A number of them, huge.
The 3 babies.
Just for starters, the catalogue is horrendous.
And what is abundantly clear is that from the moment that report was released, 2 days after Mr. Keogh was found guilty, Mr. Keogh was absolutely entitled to have his conviction overturned.
He spent more than 20 years in jail.
He did, yes. That's unforgivable, really.
In the early days, I actually thought, I was only here for a short while, and I had to say as strong as I could, mentally and physically. And if I did that, I could get through this easily. And that worked for a while. But it doesn't take long for the system, particularly the legal process, just to grind you down. You think it's slick, efficient, but it's anything but. It's slow, inexorable, unbelievably frustrating.
What was the first point that led you to believe that it was a miscarriage of justice?
Well, I think the first thing was that the evidence of the forensic pathologist didn't seem to make sense.
At the trial, which convicted Henry, the so-called Bruises to support Dr. Manock's hand grip theory was circled.
I were to give the jury a blank piece of paper with a circle written in it and then told them that the colour inside is different from the colour outside, they'd probably believe me. So it was very prejudicial, and it was an inappropriate way of presenting the information to the jury.
10 years after Henry's conviction, Dr. Manock retracted key parts of his evidence before the Medical Board of South Australia. He admitted he did not see the bruise to support his grip theory through a microscope.
He knew that at the time of the trial, but had failed to disclose it.
Manock said it was a left-handed grip, when at trial, he said it was the right hand.
He said, well, they must have taken it down wrong, which of course is impossible.
He no longer supported his own testimony at Henry's trial that Anna Jane was conscious when she drowned. The other vital piece of Manock's evidence that sealed Henry's fate at his trial was the age of the bruises.
He'd said these were recent bruises, that they'd all been made together, including the one that didn't exist.
A simple test could have determined if the bruises found on Anna Jane had occurred when she drowned. Dr. Manock did not carry out that test.
It was for a chemical called hemosiderin, and it is present in old bruises.
The bruising and the grip pattern were the one single indicator of homicide. Yet this test could have proven once and for all whether those bruises had been inflicted at or around the time of Anna's death.
The test was eventually done in early 2014. It confirmed the presence of hemosiderin, proof of bruising days or weeks before Anna Jane's death, nowhere near the time she drowned.
His case, his argument, just completely falls apart.
Armed with fresh and compelling evidence and an historic change in the law that allows prisoners a second chance to appeal their conviction, Henry finally had his case reviewed. The court found that Henry had indeed suffered a significant miscarriage of justice.
To see Henry walk out with his daughters and the spontaneous applause was really moving.
The full court quashed Henry's conviction. A retrial was ordered, but abandoned when the prosecution's key witness, Dr. Colin Manock, was ruled medically unfit to take the stand. Henry was finally free.
If he were to walk in the room right now, what would you say to him?
I'd like to believe that I could say I forgive you, but I'm not quite there yet. I'm working on that. Because I don't want to give him free space in my head and carry him around for the rest of my life. It's not worth it. And to do that would be an injustice and a disservice to what's left of my life and my family and those who are important to me.
We approached Dr. Manock for an interview. He agreed to a meeting, which he was happy to have recorded.
According to me, that case was finished and I wanted to get on with my life. And it's come back and it's been a nuisance to me.
Dr. Manock did not accept there was any problem with his evidence and said he would do a formal on-camera interview, but a few days later, cancelled on medical advice.
Give us a patch.
It's like instant peace. It just feels like the world's right again. I think Dad said that, it's like his life was on pause and he's just unpaused it.
1, 2, 3, smell.
Cheese.
An emotional reunion with his dad was also the fulfilment of a promise Henry made during his darker days in prison.
Dad had said to me, "Promise me, son, you won't do anything silly." And I said, "Okay, I'll make a deal with you. You look after yourself. You go and see the doctor. You stay well, and you'll be there when I get out. And I'll keep my side of the bargain." And as luck would have it, I walked out on bail 2 days before his 85th birthday, which was the best present he could have had.
Henry had already served 3/4 of his life sentence, but we can reveal powerful and compelling evidence that could have freed him 10 years earlier. In 2004, an independent review of Henry's case by a government-appointed medical expert, Professor Barry Vernon Roberts, found there was no evidence Anna Jane had been murdered.
Vernon Roberts said, "There is no forensic evidence here for murder, and it's most likely that she either had a cardiac arrest, some sort of cardiac event, or a faint, slipped and fell and hit her head and drowned under the water." He was the Crown's chosen expert, telling the Solicitor General that this almost certainly wasn't a murder, and there was no evidence for foul play.
That report, which also recommended testing the age of the Bruises, sat on a government shelf for 10 years.
That report should have been sufficient grounds to have referred my petition back to the courts. All I wanted was a day back in court to establish the truth. Because trials are about truth. It's not a contest.
We want the flop. It's a family and to Henry. All right. Cheers.
While Henry savours the taste of freedom, there will always be an unanswered question.
4 expert pathologists, 2 of which had been engaged by the Crown, all agreed that Anna's death was not the result of a homicide. Because the autopsy was so deficient and so defective, we will never know what that might have been. And that has to be one of the biggest tragedies of this whole case. You know, we'll never know exactly why Anna died. I can't believe we had a storm here only a few days ago. I came out of jail with a bag of 20-year-old clothes, CD and a HECS debt. So I had a bit of catching up to do. I've never considered myself a victim, and I didn't want to bang on about poor me. They just get totally boring and doesn't serve anybody.
This is tasty.
Sometime we should bring Jeremy and Abby down here. I'd love it.
They would.
Today, one of Henry's biggest advocates is his new partner, Faye. But that wasn't always the case.
I pegged him as guilty. I'm not quick to judge, but I did judge.
And you believed he was a murderer?
Yes.
And you married him?
Yeah. Big turnaround, huh?
39-year-old Henry Keogh stood motionless in the dock.
Faye, like many of her contemporaries in 1995, believed Henry was guilty as charged.
He drowned his fiancée.
There was a lot of, circumstantial things that went towards suggesting his guilt. And I took those on board, as did many people, about, the insurance policies, women in his life, and the fact that the grip mark constituted the mode of murder. Again, there was a lot of evidence that was being presented that supposedly supported it.
Then in 2009, a friend invited her to a talk by law expert Dr. Bob Moles.
When I heard that Henry's case was given top billing, I actually did not want to go, and I'm embarrassed to admit that I did not want my thoughts rattled. I didn't want to even be challenged by what I'd held as to being the truth.
Faye did go to the lecture and, as a result, read more about Henry's case and began visiting him in prison.
Slowly, but very surely, I started to believe in Henry's innocence.
I think we knew each other for something like 5 or 6 years. Became good friends. And then I guess something just clicked.
Boom, 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 boom. I don't know. What happened?
You just knew.
Yeah.
We seriously picked a beautiful day.
But it's not been an easy road. Henry still has plenty of healing to do.
I still find it difficult to show joy or excitement, hope, anticipation. And that confuses and disappoints people sometimes.
Your wife?
Yeah. That's something else they've taken off me. And
Will it come back?
I'm working on it. I'm hoping. But, it's a work in progress.
Be nice to be joyful and laugh.
I've said that so many times. I'm almost sick of hearing myself say it. And it's something I envy when I see it. Because I feel all the poorer for it. And it diminishes the joy that I could have and the relationships that I'm trying to re-engender.
Faye is helping Henry put the joy back into his life. Their future together was formally recognised in April when they married in an intimate ceremony.
I love him and he's my husband, but just as a human being, I feel he utterly deserves all the support he can get, given what he's had to bear.
So, you're free, you don't have an acquittal.
No.
How important is that to you, and can you fight for it?
Initially, it was really important to me. Not so much now, because at the end of the day, I'm free. I have my freedom, I've got my liberty, I've got what's left of my life back. Why would I want to spend more time in court with the few years I've got left for something that's not going to make that big a difference to me, to my life?
It doesn't really matter to me if people think he's guilty or not. This isn't even about clearing his name. It's about the bigger story, about the system that needs to change.
Something's got to be done to make sure I'm one of the last. I don't know what that is, but it's got to happen, Mike. It's got to happen.